and when the doctor's heart beats for her best friend. Dr. Nadia Voss had saved 37 lives in the past year, but she could not save herself from the one feeling she had spent a decade trying to bury, the ache that lived quietly behind her ribs every time her best friend Lena laughed. It was the kind of laugh that filled a room like sunlight fills an empty church, and Nadia had memorized every version of it. The soft one that came out when Lena was tired, the loud one that embarrassed her in restaurants, and the rare, breathless one she gave only to people she trusted completely. Nadia had collected all of them like pressed flowers between the pages of her memory, and she hated herself a little more each time she did. They had been best friends since the first week of college. Two girls who had found each other in a crowded orientation hall and decided, without ever saying it out loud, that they were going to be important to each other. Nadia had gone on to medical school, driven by a grief she rarely spoke about. Her younger sister had died of an undiagnosed heart condition when Nadia was 16, and that silence in the house afterward had shaped everything she became. Lena had become a high school art teacher, pouring color into the world in a way that Nadia sometimes thought was braver than anything she herself had ever done. They had kept each other through breakups and promotions, through funerals and birthday dinners, through every ordinary and extraordinary moment that life had pressed into their hands. And somewhere in all of that, without asking permission, Nadia had fallen in love with her. She had not named it for years. She called it admiration. She called it closeness. She called it the particular loyalty that forms between two people who have seen each other at their worst. But the night Lena called her crying from a parking lot because her boyfriend of 3 years had ended things over a text message, and Nadia had driven 40 minutes in the rain without a second thought, sitting on the cold asphalt beside her and holding her hand until the shaking stopped. That night, driving home alone at 2 a.m, Nadia finally let herself say it in the quiet of her car. She was in love with Lena. She had probably always been in love with Lena, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever known, including the first time she had lost a patient on the table. The cruelest part was not the loving, and it was the not knowing. Lena was warm and affectionate by nature, the kind of person who held your face in her hands when she was telling you something important, who remembered the small things you mentioned once and never forgot them, who looked at you like you mattered in a way that felt specific, even when it probably wasn't. Nadia had spent years trying to determine if what passed between them was extraordinary friendship or something else entirely, and she could never be sure, because Lena made everyone feel chosen. It was her gift and Nadia's quiet torment. For a long time, Nadia managed it by keeping herself busy in the way that only people running from something truly master. She worked double shifts. She took on research projects. She dated a woman named Petra for 7 months and told herself she was moving on, even as she found herself describing Lena in therapy sessions and not Petra. Her therapist, a sharp and unhurried woman named Dr. Osi, had looked at her one afternoon and said very simply that avoidance and endurance were not the same thing as healing, and that Nadia had confused the two for most of her adult life. Nadia had paid the full session fee, walked to her car, and cried for 20 minutes. Then she had gone back to work. The shift in everything came on a Tuesday in early November, the kind of cold, colorless day that arrives like a warning. Lena had shown up unannounced at the hospital, with a container of soup and the particular expression she wore when something was wrong, but she hadn't decided yet how to say it. They had found a corner of the cafeteria and sat across from each other the way they always had, close enough that their knees nearly touched, and Lena had talked slowly, in the circling way she did when she was working up to something. She told Nadia that she had been thinking about her life, about the pattern of it, the shape of it, what it was actually built around. She said she had realized recently that the person she called first for everything, the person she rearranged plans for, the person whose opinion she sought before making any real decision, was not anyone she had ever dated. It was Nadia. It had always been Nadia, and she said she didn't know exactly what that meant. But she had stopped being able to pretend it didn't mean something. The cafeteria noise continued around them, the clatter of trays, someone's pager going off in the distance. the low hum of a television mounted near the window, and Nadia sat very still in the middle of all of it, feeling the way a person feels when they have been bracing for impact for so long that the actual arrival of the thing is almost unbelievable. She did not say something perfectly composed. She did not have a speech prepared. She told Lena the truth, plainly and without decoration, that she had been in love with her for years, that she had spent an embarrassing amount of energy trying to be only a friend when everything in her wanted more, and that she was terrified of what saying it out loud might cost them. She said the friendship was the most important thing she had, and she would rather carry the feeling in silence than lose what they already were. Lena had been quiet for a long moment, and in that silence Nadia had felt the specific agony of a person watching the jury leave the room. Then Lena had reached across the table and taken both of Nadia's hands in hers, the way she always did when she was about to say something she meant completely. And she told her that she was not willing to keep pretending either, that she had ended her last relationship, partly because she kept measuring it against something she couldn't name then but could name now, that loving someone as a friend and loving them as more was not always two separate things arriving in sequence. Sometimes they were the same river, just finally reaching the sea. What followed was not immediate or uncomplicated. They were two women in their early 30s with full lives and established habits and a friendship so carefully constructed over a decade that changing it felt like renovation work on a building you were still living in. There were conversations that went long into the night, circling the same fears from different angles. There was the vulnerability of shifting from best friends to something more, the strange, tender awkwardness of relearning each other in a new register. Nadia's mother, a quietly traditional woman, needed time and several long phone calls before she arrived at understanding. Lena's sister, on the other hand, had apparently suspected for years and expressed her feelings on the matter with considerable enthusiasm and zero surprise. Not everything was easy, but the things that mattered rarely are. What Nadia remembered most from those months was not the difficulty but the particular relief of being fully known. She had spent so long performing competence as a doctor, as a daughter, as a friend who held herself together, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be with someone who had no interest in the performance. Lena knew the version of her that cried at pharmaceutical commercials and ate cereal straight from the box and still couldn't talk about her sister without her voice going thin. And Lena loved that version, not despite it, because of it, because that was the whole person and the whole person was who Lena had chosen. There is a particular kind of courage that gets very little recognition, not the dramatic courage of crisis, but the quiet courage of letting yourself be loved by someone who already knows you, of not running from the thing you want most because wanting it makes you vulnerable, of saying the true thing out loud when the safe thing would have been to stay silent. Nadia had spent her career honoring the courage it took for patients to trust her with their lives in the most frightening moments. It took her a long time to understand that trusting someone with your heart required the same kind of bravery, and that she had been refusing to be brave in the one place it counted most. On the evening of their first real anniversary, Nadia stood in the kitchen of the apartment they had started, sharing 6 months earlier, listening to Lena in the other room, laughing at something on the phone with her sister. And she felt it again, that specific warmth behind her ribs that had once felt like suffering and now felt like home. She thought about the girl she had been at 16, sitting in a silent house after her sister's funeral, deciding without knowing it that love was something that cost too much. She thought about how long she had carried that decision. And she thought about how Lena had, without trying, dismantled it entirely, not by being extraordinary, though she was, but simply by staying, by choosing her back. If you believe in the quiet, life-changing power of being truly seen by another person, if you know what it means to love someone so deeply that the friendship and the love become one and the same thing, please take a moment right here to like this video and share it with someone who deserves to feel less alone today. Your kindness in sharing this story could reach someone who needs it more than either of us knows. Before we reach the very end, drop a comment below telling us, have you ever loved someone in silence? Afraid that saying it out loud might change everything? Your story matters, and this community is listening. Nadia still worked long shifts. She still lost patience sometimes, and those nights were still hard in the way they had always been hard. But she no longer drove home to silence. She drove home to the light in the window that Lena always left on, to the sound of someone who knew her completely, to the life she had almost talked herself out of wanting. Love, she had learned, does not always arrive as a grand revelation. Sometimes it has been there the whole time, sitting across the table, holding your hands, waiting patiently for you to stop being afraid. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply stop, running, and finally, fully, let themselves be found.